If you can't make money and your farm goes under, you're not sustainable. Your model doesn't work.
The Farmer Share podcast takes listeners behind the scenes to learn what it takes to be a sustainable produce grower for people, profit, and planet. Good afternoon and welcome to Across the Fence. I'm Jolie Whitney. If you listen to podcasts, you know that they're perfect opportunities to learn something, or not, while you're doing something else. Or perhaps you prefer to be entertained and you don't want to keep up with the latest. Either way, podcasts are a great way to pass the time and feel connected to people talking about their passions. Andy Chamberlin works with UVM Extension's agriculture engineering as a technician and troubleshooter, helping farmers with everything from cooling to cleaning. And he's the host and producer of the Farmer Share podcast. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, why don't you tell us how your work with Extension led you to this podcast?
Well, for my very first farm visits with Extension, I was just blown away at the knowledge that farmers had and were willing to share. And it was inspiring and motivating for myself to hear their stories. And I thought, man, if only, they're so busy, they don't have time to share all this good knowledge. I just wish they had a way too. And I'm like, well, maybe that's where I could come in with my media experience.
And how long have you been doing it?
I've been podcasting for about 7 years now. I've been with Extension for 7.
Okay, so a good while then.
Yeah. I started out with the Ag Engineering podcast, which was it talked about certain pieces of equipment or tools and techniques that were innovative or useful for farms, and they were just short topic episodes. And then I realized that once you get the farmer talking, they just want to keep going, and there's so much more story that goes along with just a certain implement or whatnot. So that's where I pivoted a little bit and changed it to the Farmer Share, where we get the whole story of the farm and why they're doing what they do.
And kind of building on that, podcasts are pretty popular because it's recorded. You almost get more of like an interpersonal feel. Have you heard a lot of candid or unexpected stories through this medium?
Yeah, for sure. What makes my podcast unique is I do them all in person, on farm, often around their kitchen table or in the greenhouse. A lot of podcasts are recorded over the internet or over the phone, and I find that quality is just lacking. So if you can do that in person and clip a mic on them and just walk around their fields and say, hey, tell me about your life, they just open right up and forget that they're being recorded, and it's just a conversation amongst a couple friends, which is really engaging and makes for good conversation and lets them go deep on topics.
Great, and let's actually jump into hearing some clips. We have, our first one is from a New Hampshire border farmer, Pooh Sprague, and he's talking about the vagaries of farming, talking about weather and the skills of farming and how sometimes they align and sometimes they don't. Let's take a listen.
Michael Smith once said to me, farmers are resilient and they're very bright, and they can farm in swamps and they can farm on deserts. The problem is we never know what it's going to be, whether it's a desert and that's, I think, the last couple of years back to back have been, the exact indication of that. 2 years ago, in 2022, we had a potato crop on a well-drained soil, and we didn't have irrigation. It was a bit of a gamble, but we took it in the shorts and ended up with 25% of the crop. This year we were on well-drained soil down here, and we had cannons and everything ready to go when the tuber size started to size up the tubers and things, and you know how that worked. We didn't run a pump or irrigate a drop of water. And we had a bumper crop because we had more water than we could possibly use. So
it sounds like Pooh knows more about farming than you or I will ever manage to learn. How do you kind of wrangle that knowledge and make it more digestible for a listener maybe like me who doesn't know as much?
Yeah, it's really tricky to edit it down, and I try not to edit too much. I really trim out maybe the side conversations where they might make an off comment or whatever, just talking about something like to me. But for the most part, I try to keep it pretty long, and that's why I went to the long format, because unless you know the full story, things can get taken out of context, and every farm is different, and every farm's experience is different. So to understand, how they got started with the resources that they had really changes their business trajectory, their farming trajectory. So I find it's helpful to get the whole big picture.
All right, we have another soundbite here from Gio Honigford of Hurricane Flats Farm, and that's in South Royalton. And he recently got out of farming to focus on something else, and he talks a little bit about changing careers and self-care for farmers. Let's take a listen.
As somebody said, farmers are very good at taking care of their farm, but not as good about taking care of themselves. So I think a lot of times they just put their head down and they get the work done, and they don't come up for air enough to know that this is you only got one shot at life. And is that what you want to do your whole life? It almost sounds like I'm making an ad for please don't ever farm. That's not the case. I loved what I did for 26 years and can't imagine another lifestyle. But, that was enough.
And one of the things he grew was actually popcorn. Can you tell me a little about what you learned about growing popcorn in Vermont?
Well, he's one of the very few people who grow popcorn in Vermont, and like most Vermont farms, it's tricky because we're not a large-scale producer, so trying to figure out how we can take something that's done on large industry and turn it into our level of production on our rolling acres is a bit unique. I'm also a popcorn grower myself, so we were really deep dived into that topic. So that was fun, and just everything from varieties to drying systems, because you can't just harvest it when it's ready like you can out west. You gotta dry it post-harvest, which takes more materials and tools and time and all of that.
And something I actually just noticed, the photos that you have as well as the podcast audio. How did that come about? I know a lot of farmers we speak to here are maybe more comfortable not on camera. So how did that idea originate?
Yeah, I have a passion for, actually videography is what got me into media. So I came at it from video and photo, and I always just took a camera with me on farms, and that's kind of what started it. And then I realized I wanted to capture more of the conversation, so that's when I added some microphones to the mix to really tell the story. And I know farming is so visual, it's helpful to really see the implement that we're talking about, so that's why I have a website where I can post all those photos or video clips that I take along the way to help round out and explain and show what it is that we saw and talked about.
And Gio talked a little bit about self-care in his. And that came up in a conversation you had with Lisa McDougall as well with the Mighty Food Farm, who gave you a tour of her greenhouse while she was doing some chores. So let's take a listen to that.
So I used to have this philosophy of do as much as you can every day, like no matter what, like just go do it, right? Because sometimes you do and you can't do it tomorrow, but it's like that philosophy sometimes doesn't always serve me super well because I'll just like keep going. And like sometimes you have to stop, and so that stop is important so that I'm like getting sleep. And
it's often when things break too, when you're pushing.
Totally.
Or tired or.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you said you tend not to cut a lot, but is there anything that you will leave on the cutting room floor, maybe a conversation that veers a little too far into the obscure and you have to reel it back in?
Yeah, sometimes we deviate a little bit, but there's not too much that I cut out. I find that once you get a farmer talking about their farm, it's often easy to keep them on track, and they just keep on rolling. Sometimes I may trim it down to try to keep it under 2 hours because there's so much to cover. But it's all good in my opinion, and especially combining the work-life balance, because it's so integrated in farming and such a delicate dance between family life and work life, and just trying to get everything done with a never-ending to-do list.
Sure, and farming is definitely a business that kind of lends to stories like that, so It's a great forum. And you talk a lot about resilience, and that's a theme in a lot of these podcast episodes. And it came up in your interview with Jericho Settlers Farm, Mark Fashing and Krista Alexander. So let's take a listen to that.
I mean, life's too short. You gotta grab the bull by the horns. You're not gonna get a second chance at this. So if you want to do something, it doesn't have to be farming. Whatever you want to do in life, you got to go after it and do it, and just be curious and ask tons of questions and
the worst
learn,
thing that happen
learn
is they'll say no.
Yeah, and then you go find somebody else that
Fair
says yes. Yeah, find another farmer that says yes, or find another business person that says yes, and just keep learning.
Good advice from Mark, as always. And you've worked with Krista and Mark for years with your job in Extension. Is it easier to talk to someone you're familiar with or someone you've never met?
That's a great question. It is definitely easier to talk with somebody who I've worked with and know a little bit already, and that's oftentimes why I'll start with a walking tour of their farm and get an interview and learn what it is that they do and kind of see what they're up to before we'll sit down at the kitchen table, and I'll ask some of those deeper questions about how and why they got started farming and their business trajectory. That way I kind of have a frame of mind myself, and to bring the listeners of the podcast along with me, because they don't know who I'm talking to, even if I do. They don't. So I gotta bring them up to speed on who it is that we're talking to. Are they growing a half acre or 100 acres?
Yeah, that's a great perspective, making sure everyone's on the same page when you start. We've actually got one more interview to share, and this is the first one that you ever did, if I'm right, and that's John Cohen of Deep Meadow Farm in Ascutney, and let's hear some words of wisdom from him.
What fulfills you in this career?
Feeding people, watching things grow, the magic of how we can produce food from seeds. That I was gifted enough to be a steward of this amazing piece of land here at the kind of in Vermont at the base of Ascutney on a river. You know, what an amazing, amazing gift that is to be able to have that. It wakes me up every morning.
It's a pretty good reason.
And so what made you kick off this program?
Like I said earlier, I was just interested in sharing the passion and training the next generation of growers, because the farming population is aging. It's hard to farm. It takes so many skills, and you can't just read about it or learn about it out of a book. You've got to learn from other people's experience. So anything I can do to capture that history from the experienced growers, I'm trying to do, and to share with other individuals to learn what it takes and to put all the pieces together.
And do you have maybe a farmer that you're dying to interview, a white whale, or even a recording you're looking forward to coming up?
I've got a list of probably 20 or 30 farms. I mean, everybody's story is so different, and there's something to learn from every farmer. So there's many that I want to interview, but no one in particular. I really enjoy speaking with those who are maybe closer to my grandparents' age. You know, those have made a career of farming and made it work. Their entry to farming is going to be a lot different than somebody getting into started now, but if they've been farming for 30, 40, 50 years, they certainly have some wisdom to share with the next gen grower. So happy to capture and share that.
And you mentioned yourself, you grow popcorn some. What do you think being a fellow farmer adds to you as a host?
Yeah, I think it gives me a lot of buy-in and interest, and it sparks that curiosity myself. You know, how are they managing the weeds along the plastic rows or whatnot? So I think I have a grower's perspective, and helps me ask those deeper leading questions rather than just glazing over a subject. And it gets into the technical details that are helpful and not necessarily always talked about. And
All right, absolutely, a little knowledgeable insight from you.
Right.
All right, thank you so much for joining us today.
No, thanks for having me.
And if you would like to download the Farmer Share podcast, you can search for it wherever you get your podcasts or visit the website on your screen, thefarmershare.com. My thanks to the crew behind the scenes here at WCAX who helped make this program possible. I'm Jolie Whitney. Have a good one.